And he's like, yeah, I'd say lots of knives. Knives should be everywhere. New study from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. And let's remember that, or I should point out that this Quincy Institute is not, they're not some like peacenik, commie outlet. All right. They generally are at least somewhat belligerent, and they throw in all the caveats into this story where they say Russia's completely unjustified, out of the blue. Who could have seen this coming? Invasion to kill children in Ukraine. They throw all that in there as well. But that's kind of not the point. The point is that they looked into all the media coverage and they found that defense contractors are largely, almost exclusively, funding the think tanks that our media uses to have the Ukraine debate. So, and I know this doesn't shock you, but again, there's a difference between kind of feeling something. I feel like this is probably funded by defense contractors, and seeing the evidence, seeing the proof. Think tanks in the United States are a go-to resource for media outlets seeking expert opinions on pressing public policy issues. But think tanks often have entrenched stances. You don't say. A growing body of research has shown that their funders can influence their analysis and commentary. The result is an environment where the interests of the most generous funders can dominate think tank policy debates. The funders of the think tanks dominate the debates that are then put into the public eye via mainstream media. So, and again, I know that you guys are like, well, of course, but this is the evidence. This is, these think tanks that the U.S. media and Western media quote extensively whenever they want to say something is actually true, whenever they want to say this is an official stance and accurate. They quote these think tanks that are heavily funded by weapons contractors, by the sociopaths. You have completely out of their mind sociopaths who are invested fully in killing, endless missiles, endless bombs being dropped on children, on men and women who are completely innocent. That is where their well-being comes from, their income. All of it comes from that, and they then fund the think tanks that tell the media what to think, and to some degree also tell our ruling government what to think. So hold on one second. All right, so let's continue here. One such debate concerns the appropriate level of U.S. military involvement in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This brief investigates Department of Defense, DoD, contractor funding of think tanks, those organizations' advocacy efforts for policies that would benefit those funders, and the media's predominant reliance on think tanks funded by the defense sector. The analysis finds that the vast majority of media mentions of think tanks in articles about U.S. arms and the Ukraine war are from think tanks whose funders profit from U.S. arms and U.S. war, from U.S. military spending, arms sales, and in many cases directly from U.S. involvement in the Ukraine war. So, I mean, even if you had no problem with weapons contractors funding think tanks, even if you were like, well, so right there, the corporate America did it do. You can fund whatever you want. It's freedom. Even if you had no problem with that, still, when you're writing an article about whether the U.S. should be arming and sending arms on a massive scale to Ukraine, the last people you should ever quote are the people funded by the fucking arms industry. The last people. Honestly, it's like going up to a knife murderer and being like, do you think that we should have a lot of knives readily available? And he's like, yeah, I'd say lots of knives. Knives should be everywhere. Right? It's you don't. That's who you don't go to. Step one, if you wanted to be even remotely unbiased, don't go to the think tanks funded by the arms industry. While this brief did not seek to establish a direct causality between think tank policy recommendations and their arms industry funding in the case of the Ukraine war, we find a clear correlation between the two. We also found that media outlets disproportionately rely on commentary from defense sector funded think tanks. So, again, I know many of you are not shocked by this, but basically, the debate over whether to send arms to Ukraine is quoting almost exclusively think tanks funded by the arms industry. It is the most obvious and glaring conflict of interest, to say the least. Corruption would be a better word. Mafia might be a better word. And so this study, this report shows it quite clearly.